At 0742 hours on May 27, 1940, Lieutenant James McAllister crouched behind a crumbling stone wall near the French village of Lepinette, watching 5 German soldiers advance through the morning mist toward his position. 33 years old, 14 years since West Point, 0 confirmed kills in combat. The Wehrmacht had already crushed Poland in 36 days. Now their panzers were tearing through France at 40 miles per day, and the entire British Expeditionary Force was running for the sea. McAllister's company had lost 11 men in the past 72 hours. The Germans had better tanks, better aircraft, better coordination. British soldiers were dying by the hundreds along every road leading to Dunkirk. The retreat had become a rout, but James McAllister was not running. He was carrying a 6-foot English longbow, 70 pounds of draw weight, effective range of 200 yards in the hands of an expert archer, and McAllister was an expert. He had represented the United States at the World Archery Championships in Oslo just 11 months earlier. 26th place out of 63 competitors from 14 nations. Not a champion, but good enough to put an arrow through a playing card at 50 yards. Good enough to kill a man before that man ever heard the shot. The German patrol was now at 30 yards. Close enough. McAllister could see the sergeant leading them. A veteran by the look of his careful movements, probably a man who had fought through the Polish campaign. The sergeant was scanning the hedge-checking windows, looking for the standard threats. Rifles, machine guns, grenades. He never thought to look for a medieval weapon. McAllister drew the bowstring back to his ear. The yew-wood creaked under the tension. His fingers found the familiar anchor position on the string, the same position he had used 10,000 times in practice. He had made this exact shot countless times at targets. He had never made it with a human being at the other end. His mind flashed to another moment. Another man. 48 hours earlier. Corporal Billy Hayes, 23 years old. Iowa farm boy, twin daughters named Annie and Rose, 4 years old and 3 years old. Photo in his helmet that his wife updated every single month. Billy had shown him that photo 3 days ago. Look how big they're getting, Lieutenant. Annie lost her front tooth. Rose is starting to read. Billy Hayes had 48 hours until the Dunkirk evacuation. He never made it. McAllister could still feel Billy's blood on his hands, could still see that arterial spray when the German machine gun tore through Billy's femoral artery, could still hear Billy choking on his own blood, trying to say one last thing to his daughters. Tell them, Daddy. Billy died mid-sentence. The photo fell from his helmet into the mud. 2 blonde girls in matching dresses with missing front teeth and bright smiles soaked in their father's blood. That night, covered in Billy Hayes' blood, scrubbing it from under his fingernails, McAllister made a decision. No more regulations, no more authorized weapons lists, no more letting good men die because some officer in London decided what was proper to carry into battle. He would use whatever weapon kept men alive. The arrow flew. The German sergeant dropped without a sound, the shaft buried deep in his chest. It was the first confirmed longbow kill in a European war since the 17th century. It would be the last confirmed longbow kill of the entire Second World War, and it was completely illegal. Army Regulation 670-1. No unauthorized weapons in combat zones. Maximum penalty, 5 years hard labor. In an active combat zone, the penalty could be worse, much worse. McAllister lowered the bow. The other 4 Germans were shouting, confused, spinning in circles, trying to figure out where the shot had come from. They had no idea a man with a medieval weapon was killing them from 200 years in the past. He knocked another arrow, drew, released. A second German fell. By the time the remaining 3 figured out what was happening and started running, McAllister had already disappeared into the ruins, bow in hand, moving toward the coast where 300,000 men were desperately trying to get home. 5 months earlier, McAllister had stood in an army supply depot in southern England, requisition form in his hand. The supply sergeant looked at the form, looked at McAllister, looked at the form again. You requisitioned a longbow, Lieutenant? Yes, Sergeant. That's not Army issue, I'm aware. The sergeant leaned forward. Army Regulation 670-1 prohibits unauthorized weapons in combat zones, sir. Maximum penalty is 5 years hard labor. I'm aware of that too. A captain appeared from the back office. Lieutenant McAllister, you cannot bring a bow to war. This is 1940, not 1340. McAllister met his eyes. Sir, a silent kill at 200 yards saves lives. The Germans don't know where the shot came from. They panic. They make mistakes. Mistakes get them killed instead of us. The captain shook his head. Request denied. Do not bring that weapon to France. McAllister picked up his requisition form. Yes, sir. He brought it anyway, along with a Scottish claymore sword wrapped in a tarp at the bottom of his duffel bag, and a set of Highland bagpipes hidden in his footlocker under 3 layers of spare uniforms. If he was going to break one regulation, he figured he might as well break 3. The supply sergeant caught him at the door. Lieutenant, McAllister turned. The sergeant glanced back at the captain's office, then looked at McAllister. I didn't see anything, sir. The longbow, the sword. I didn't see any of it. Why? Because bureaucracy kills soldiers, sir. I've been in this army 22 years. Seen too many good men die because someone in an office said they couldn't have the equipment they needed. You want to save lives with a bow and arrow, I'm not going to stop you. The sergeant handed back the requisition form, but he had stamped it, denied in large red letters. If anyone asked, that weapon was never approved. Understand, McAllister understood. 3 weeks later, he was in France with an illegal longbow, an illegal sword, and an illegal set of bagpipes waiting for someone to notice and court-martial him. Nobody noticed until Dunkirk. The weapons McAllister carried came from another life, another time. Flathead Valley, Montana, 1915. Population 847. Logging town. His father worked the sawmill 12 hours a day for 35 cents an hour. His grandfather Angus was different. Angus McAllister, Scottish immigrant, wilderness guide, taught rich men from back east how to hunt elk and survive when everything went wrong. Best tracker in 3 counties. And every Sunday when most families went to church, Angus took 8-year-old James into the mountains. They stood on a ridgeline above Flathead Lake. October, aspens turning gold. Angus handed the boy a longbow. Why a bow, Grandpa? Everyone uses rifles now. Angus knelt down, adjusted the boy's grip, fixed his stance. Flint, do you know why I teach you archery when every man in the valley has a Winchester? No, sir. Because rifles are loud. Every animal for miles hears the shot. Every enemy knows where you are. But an arrow's silent. By the time your target's friend realizes what happened, you've already put a second arrow through his chest, James frowned. But Grandpa, rifles are better. They shoot farther. They're faster. Everyone says so, Angus smiled. Everyone follows what they're told works, boy. Smart men use what actually works. And here's what I'm going to teach you today. Are you listening? Yes, sir. Weapons don't become obsolete, Flint. Warriors do. A bow is only useless if the man holding it doesn't know how to use it. A sword is only outdated if the man swinging it forgot how to fight. The weapon doesn't matter. The warrior matters. Don't be an obsolete warrior, boy. Learn everything. Master everything. And when the time comes to fight, you use whatever wins. James shot that bow every Sunday for the next 8 years. When Angus died in 1920, he left his grandson a claymore sword, a family heirloom from 1746. The boy hung it on his bedroom wall and never imagined he would actually use it. James graduated West Point Military Academy in 1926. Scholarship because his family couldn't afford tuition. Served 7 years in the Philippines. Peacetime garrison duty. Hated every minute. Resigned in 33. Went home to Montana. Worked as a wilderness guide. Practiced with his bow every single day. In 1939, he competed at the World Archery Championships in Oslo, Norway. 26th place out of 63 competitors. Not a champion, but good enough to put an arrow through a playing card at 50 yards. Good enough to kill a man before that man ever heard the shot. When war broke out in September 39, McAllister knew what he had to do. Go back to the army. Bring his grandfather's weapons. Prove that Angus was right. Weapons don't become obsolete. Warriors do. And James McAllister had no intention of being obsolete. American officer. Volunteered before the United States entered the war. Assigned as a liaison to a British infantry company. Spoke fluent English, obviously, but also passable French and German. Excellent marksman, wilderness survival expert, West Point graduate, and carrying a longbow, a Scottish sword, and a set of bagpipes. The British captain who received him at the depot outside Calais stared at the weapons for a full 30 seconds before speaking. "Lieutenant, what are those?" McAllister set down his duffel bag. "A bow, a sword, and bagpipes, sir." "I can see that. Why do you have them?" "Because they work, sir." The captain blinked. "Work, yes, sir. The bow kills silently at 200 yards. The sword creates psychological shock in close combat. The bagpipes disrupt enemy morale and coordination. All three have been proven effective in warfare for centuries." The captain looked at his adjutant, then back at McAllister. "Lieutenant, this is 1940. We have rifles, machine guns, tanks, artillery. We do not fight with bows and swords." McAllister met his eyes without blinking. "With respect, sir, you fight with whatever wins. Sometimes that's a tank. Sometimes it's a well-placed arrow. I'm not asking permission to use only medieval weapons. I'm asking permission to use them when they're more effective than modern ones." The captain opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You're either brilliant or insane, Lieutenant. Probably both, sir." The captain sighed. "I don't have regulations covering this situation. I'm going to pretend I didn't see those weapons. But if you get yourself killed doing something stupid, I'm writing in your file that I warned you." "Understood, sir. You're dismissed." McAllister picked up his duffel and walked out. Behind him, he heard the adjutant whisper to the captain, "Sir, should we report him?" The captain's response was quiet but clear. "Report him for what? Being creative. We're losing this war, Lieutenant. If that American wants to fight with a bow and arrow, I'm not going to stop him. We need every advantage we can get." McAllister smiled. He had 3 months before Dunkirk. 3 months before everything fell apart. 3 months before he met Corporal Billy Hayes and watched him die in a muddy field with a photograph of his daughters soaking in his blood. 3 months before McAllister decided that regulations didn't matter anymore. 3 months before he became the last man in modern warfare to kill an enemy soldier with a longbow. And 3 months before the British Army realized that sometimes the oldest weapons were still the deadliest. But first he needed to meet the men he would lead into hell. Private Tommy Reeves was 19 years old and terrified of everything. He was from Detroit, worked in an auto factory before the war, assembled transmissions on a line where the noise was so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. His mother was a widow, 3 younger siblings. Tommy sent half his pay home every month to keep them fed. He had volunteered for the Army because factory work was killing his lungs and because the recruiter promised adventure. He got mud-cold rations in the constant fear that every sound in the dark was a German patrol coming to kill him. McAllister met him during a training exercise in February. Tommy was supposed to be manning a listening post. McAllister approached from downwind, moving silently through the trees, and got within 10 feet before Tommy noticed him. The kid nearly shot him. "Private, lower your weapon." Tommy fumbled with the rifle, hands shaking. "Sir, I didn't hear you, sir." "That's the point, Private. If I was German, you'd be dead." Tommy's face went white. "I'm sorry, sir. I was watching the road like they told me, but you came from the woods, and I didn't think anyone could move that quiet, and I—" McAllister held up a hand. "Stop. Breathe." Tommy gulped air. "What's your name?" "Private Reeves, sir." "Tommy Reeves. Where are you from?" "Tommy, Detroit, sir." "Factory work." "Yes, sir. Transmissions." "Fisher Body Plant 3. McAllister nodded. "You're used to noise, loud noise. All day, every day. So when it's quiet like this, your ears don't know what to listen for." "That right?" Tommy nodded slowly. "I guess so, sir." "Then I'm going to teach you. Next week, every night, you and I are going into those woods. I'm going to show you how to hear things you didn't know you could hear, how to move without sound, how to see in the dark. By the time I'm done with you, you'll be able to hear a German lighting a cigarette from 50 yards away." Tommy stared at him. "Why would you do that, sir?" "Because you're scared. And scared men die. But trained men survive. And I need you alive, Private Reeves." Tommy Reeves became McAllister's shadow. And 3 months later, when the Germans came and everything went to hell, Tommy Reeves would be one of the 3 men McAllister saved. But first he needed to meet the man who would save him. Sergeant Frank Donovan was 31 years old and had already fought in 1 World War. He had enlisted in 1918 at age 19, spent 6 months in France during the final Allied offensive, saw combat at the Meuse-Argonne, watched men die in trenches and gas attacks and artillery barrages that turned the earth into a moonscape. He came home in 1919 with a Bronze Star, a limp in his left leg from shrapnel, and a deep distrust of officers who had never seen real combat. When war broke out again in '39, Donovan re-enlisted. He told his wife he was too old to fight. She told him he was a liar. He kissed her goodbye and reported for duty. The British Army made him a sergeant and sent him to France. McAllister met him during a night patrol in March. Donovan was leading a squad through no man's land checking German positions. McAllister had volunteered to go along as an observer. Halfway through the patrol, Donovan stopped the squad and held up a fist. Everyone froze. McAllister moved up beside him. "What is it?" Sergeant Donovan pointed into the darkness. "German patrol, 300 yards, moving east." McAllister strained his eyes, saw nothing. "How do you know?" Donovan tapped his ear. "Hear that metal on metal, rifle sling hitting a belt buckle. Germans use different gear than we do, different sound." McAllister listened, heard it, a faint clink, clink, clink in the distance. "Impressive, Sergeant." Donovan glanced at him. "You learn quick or you die, sir. I learned in 18. What about you?" McAllister smiled. "Montana wilderness, different enemy, same principle." Donovan studied him for a moment. "You're the one with the bow and sword. That's me." Donovan shook his head. "With respect, sir, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This isn't the Middle Ages. Germans have machine guns." McAllister kept his voice quiet. "Sergeant, what kills more men? Bullets or mistakes?" Donovan frowned. "Bullets. Wrong. Mistakes kill first. Fear kills second. Bullets kill third. A man who's afraid makes mistakes. A man who's confused makes mistakes, and when a German sees me coming at him with a sword and bagpipes, he's both. His brain locks up for 2 seconds trying to figure out what he's seeing, and in combat, 2 seconds is fatal." Donovan said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Maybe you're not as dumb as I thought." McAllister grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment, Sergeant." Donovan became his second in command, and 3 months later, when Billy Hayes died and McAllister decided regulations didn't matter anymore, Frank Donovan would be the first man to understand why. But none of them knew that yet. In March 1940, they were just 3 soldiers trying to stay alive in a war that was about to consume them all. McAllister with his medieval weapons and his Montana survival skills. Tommy Reeves with his factory worker's hands and his constant fear. Frank Donovan with his World War I scars and his deep suspicion of officers who thought they knew better than experience. 3 men who would fight together across 2 continents. 3 men who would face death more times than any of them could count. 3 men who would prove that sometimes courage and creativity mattered more than firepower. But first they had to survive Dunkirk, and that meant watching Billy Hayes die. May 24th, 1940, 3 days before the Arrow. The British Expeditionary Force was collapsing faster than anyone had predicted. The Germans had punched through the Maginot Line. Their panzers were rolling across France like a steel flood. Every road leading to the coast was clogged with refugees and retreating soldiers. McAllister's company was part of the rear guard. Their job was simple and suicidal: slow the German advance long enough for 300,000 men to evacuate from the beaches at Dunkirk. They were going to die doing it. Everyone knew it. Corporal Billy Hayes knew it too. McAllister found him at dawn on the 24th, sitting on a fallen log outside the village of Berg, cleaning his rifle. The morning was cold. Mist hung in the fields like cotton. Somewhere to the east, artillery rumbled, getting closer. Billy looked up when McAllister approached. "Morning, Lieutenant." "Morning, Corporal." "Rifle giving you trouble?" Billy shook his head. "No, sir. Just making sure. Can't afford a jam today." McAllister sat down beside him. "No, you can't." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Billy reached into his helmet and pulled out a photograph. Held it so McAllister could see. 2 little girls, blonde hair, matching blue dresses, missing front teeth, bright smiles that could light up a room. "My twins," Billy said quietly. "Annie and Rose. 4 and 3. Wife sends me a new picture every month. This one came last week." McAllister studied the photo. "They're beautiful, Billy. They're getting so big." Annie lost her front tooth. "See? And Rose is starting to read. Wife says she sounds out every word in her picture books. Takes her 20 minutes to read one page, but she does it. Billy traced the edge of the photograph with his thumb. 48 hours, Lieutenant. That's all I need. 48 hours and I'm on a boat to England. Then home. Then I get to see them again. You'll make it, Billy. Billy looked at him. Will I? Sir McAllister held his eyes. Yes, you will. I'll make sure of it. Billy smiled, slipped the photo back into his helmet. Thank you, sir. They moved out at 0600. 12 men, McAllister leading. Orders were to scout German positions north of Bergs and report back. Simple reconnaissance. In and out. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Tommy Reeves was on point. He moved carefully, rifle up, checking every corner. The past 2 months of training with McAllister had transformed him. He was still scared, but now he knew how to use that fear, how to let it sharpen his senses instead of paralyzing him. Frank Donovan was at the rear covering their withdrawal route. The old sergeant had his rifle slung and a grenade in each hand. If the Germans came, Donovan would hold them long enough for everyone else to escape. That was the kind of man he was. Billy Hayes was in the middle of the column right behind McAllister. His position was supposed to be the safest. Away from point, away from rear guard, protected by the men in front and behind. It wasn't safe enough. They were moving through an abandoned farm when Billy's rifle jammed. McAllister heard him curse, quiet and frustrated. He turned. Billy was crouched beside a stone wall trying to clear the mechanism. Mud in the action, common problem in France. The wet spring had turned everything to soup and rifle actions clogged constantly. You were supposed to clean them every few hours. Billy had cleaned his that morning. It jammed anyway. Problem. Corporal Billy looked up. Rifle's fouled, sir. Give me 30 seconds. McAllister nodded. Take your time. We're not in a hurry. That was a lie. They were always in a hurry. But McAllister had learned long ago that rushing a man with a jammed rifle only made things worse. Billy worked the action. Metal scraped on metal. The bolt stuck halfway open. He muttered something under his breath and reached for his cleaning rod. The German machine gunner had been hiding in the barn loft for 3 hours. He had watched the British patrol approach, had counted 12 men, had waited until they were in the perfect kill zone. Open ground, no cover, bunched up. And then one of them stopped to fix his rifle. The machine gunner smiled. He opened fire. The MG-42 fired at 1,200 rounds per minute. In the time it takes to blink, it could put 20 bullets downrange. The sound was distinctive, not the sharp crack of a rifle. A tearing noise, like ripping canvas, ripping flesh. Billy Hayes took 3 rounds, one through the chest, left lung. He would have survived that. Collapsed lung, sure, but survivable. One through the shoulder, shattered collarbone. Painful but not fatal. One through the upper thigh, femoral artery. That one killed him. McAllister saw Billy go down, saw the blood spray, bright arterial red, pumping with each heartbeat, a fountain of it. Billy hit the ground and the blood kept coming. McAllister was running before he consciously decided to move. Donovan was shouting, covering fire, covering fire. Tommy Reeves was firing at the barn, short controlled bursts, the way McAllister had taught him. McAllister reached Billy in 4 seconds. The blood was everywhere. Billy was on his back, hands pressed to his thigh, trying to stop the bleeding. It wasn't working. The femoral artery is the main blood supply to the leg. When it ruptures, you have maybe 3 minutes before you bleed out. Maybe less if you're unlucky. Billy was unlucky. McAllister ripped open Billy's first aid kit, found the pressure bandage, pressed it against the wound as hard as he could. Blood spurted between his fingers with every heartbeat. Billy's eyes were wide. He was trying to speak but couldn't. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. McAllister leaned close. Don't talk, Billy. Don't talk. Stay with me. Billy's hand reached up, grabbed McAllister's collar. His grip was already weakening. Behind them, Donovan was laying down suppressive fire. The machine gun in the barn went quiet, either dead or reloading. Didn't matter which. Tommy Reeves appeared beside McAllister. His face was white. Oh, God. Oh, God. Lieutenant, is he? Get his helmet, McAllister snapped. Tommy grabbed the helmet. The photograph fell out, fluttered to the ground. 2 blonde girls in matching blue dresses. Billy saw it fall. His eyes tracked it. His hand left McAllister's collar and reached for the photo. He couldn't reach it. His arm fell back. McAllister pressed harder on the wound. The blood was slowing. That wasn't a good sign. It meant Billy's heart was giving out. It meant there wasn't enough blood left to pump. Billy's lips moved, no sound at first. Then a whisper. Tell them. McAllister leaned closer. Tell who, Billy? Annie. Rose. Tell them. His hand moved again, weaker this time, trying to point at the photograph. Tell them, Daddy. Billy Hayes died before he could finish the sentence. His eyes stayed open, staring at the photograph of his daughters. Two little girls who would grow up without a father, who would be told that Daddy died a hero, who would never really understand what that meant, who would spend the rest of their lives wondering what he had been trying to say in his last moment. McAllister knelt there for 10 seconds, hands covered in Billy's blood. The photograph on the ground in front of him. Two smiling girls who didn't know yet that their world had just ended. Then he picked up the photograph, folded it carefully, put it in his own pocket, and made a decision. Lieutenant, Donovan's voice, urgent. We need to move. Germans will be coming. McAllister looked down at his hands. Billy's blood covered them. Under his fingernails, soaked into his sleeves, he could smell it. Copper and salt. He looked at Billy's rifle. Still jammed, still fouled with mud. Standard issue. Supposed to be reliable. Failed anyway. And Billy Hayes died because of it. McAllister stood up slowly. Tommy Reeves was staring at Billy's body. The kid looked like he was going to be sick. McAllister put a hand on his shoulder. Tommy, look at me. Tommy turned. His eyes were wet. This wasn't your fault. Understand? This was bad luck and bad equipment. Nothing you could have done. Tommy nodded but didn't look convinced. Donovan appeared beside them. Lieutenant, we need to go. Now. McAllister looked at the barn where the machine gunner had been, then back at Billy, then at the photograph in his pocket. He thought about regulations, about authorized weapons, about officers in London who had never seen combat deciding what soldiers could carry into battle. He thought about his grandfather's words. Weapons don't become obsolete. Warriors do. He thought about Billy's last words. Tell them, Daddy. And he decided, no more regulations, no more authorized equipment lists, no more letting good men die because someone decided what was proper. From now on, he would use whatever weapon kept men alive, even if it meant a court-martial, even if it meant a firing squad. Billy Hayes would not be the last man to die, but he would be the last man to die for no reason. McAllister pulled out his longbow, the one he had been hiding, the one that was illegal to carry. Donovan stared. Lieutenant, what are you doing saving lives, Sergeant? That's what I'm doing. They buried Billy Hayes in a shallow grave outside Bergs. No time for a proper funeral. No chaplain, no ceremony. Just 12 men standing in silence while McAllister said a few words. Corporal William Hayes, 23 years old, Iowa. Father of two, good soldier, good man, died doing his duty. He didn't mention the jammed rifle. He didn't mention the 48 hours Billy needed. He didn't mention the photograph still in his pocket. He just said amen and walked away. That night back at their temporary bivouac, McAllister sat alone and tried to wash Billy's blood off his hands. It wouldn't come off. He scrubbed until his skin was raw. The blood came off eventually, but he could still see it, still feel it, sticky and warm and pumping through his fingers while Billy Hayes died in front of him. Tommy Reeves found him an hour later. The kid sat down without asking permission. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Tommy spoke. His first kill today, sir. McAllister looked at him. The German in the barn. I shot him, saw him fall. That was my first. How do you feel Tommy thought about it? I don't know, sir. I thought I'd feel different. Thought it would mean something. But it just felt like shooting at a target. Just a man falling down. That's normal, McAllister said quietly. Tommy picked at the dirt. My hands were shaking after. Couldn't stop them. Sergeant Donovan saw. He didn't say anything, but I know he saw. Donovan's hands shake too, McAllister said. Mine do. Everyone's do. The ones who say they don't are lying. Tommy looked up. Really, really. Fear and adrenaline. Your body dumps chemicals into your blood to keep you alive. Makes you shake after. Means you're human. Tommy nodded slowly. Billy's rifle jammed, sir. That's what got him killed. Yes. Standard issue. We all got the same rifle. What if mine jams McAllister met his eyes? It might. And if it does, you clear it as fast as you can and you keep fighting. That's all you can do. Is that all? No. McAllister pulled out his longbow, laid it across his knees. You can also make sure you have a backup weapon. Something that doesn't jam. Something that doesn't fail. Something that works even when everything else goes to hell. Tommy stared at the bow. Sir, that's not authorized. I know. You could get court-martialed. I know that too. Then why? Because Billy Hayes died 48 hours before he could see his daughters again. And I'm not letting that happen to anyone else if I can prevent it. Regulations be damned. Tommy looked at the bow, then at McAllister, then back at the bow. Will you teach me? Sir McAllister smiled. Yes, Private Reeves, I will. 3 days later, McAllister killed his first German with an arrow. 3 days after that, the evacuation from Dunkirk was complete, and 300,000 men made it home alive. McAllister came home with his bow, his sword, his bagpipes, and a photograph of 2 blonde girls he had promised to tell something he could never tell them. He also came home with a new mission. No more following regulations that got men killed. From now on, he would use whatever worked. And if the army wanted to court-martial him for it, they were welcome to try. Within weeks of returning from Dunkirk, McAllister volunteered for a new unit the British were forming. They called themselves the Commandos. The training would be brutal, beyond anything the British Army had ever attempted. The missions would be suicidal raids into Nazi-occupied territory. The casualty rates were expected to be catastrophic. McAllister requested permission to bring his sword and bow on operations. They said yes, not because they believed in medieval weapons, but because after Dunkirk, the British Army was desperate for any advantage they could get. And James McAllister had a reputation now. The American who fought with a bow, the officer who didn't follow regulations, the man who would do whatever it took to keep his soldiers alive. The training took place in Scotland. Achnacarry Castle, the most brutal military training facility in the British Empire. Men marched 30 miles a day carrying full equipment. They practiced amphibious landings in freezing water. They learned to kill silently with knives, garrots, and bare hands. They fired live ammunition over each other's heads during exercises. Men who couldn't keep up were sent back to their original units in disgrace. McAllister excelled at everything. He was 33 years old, older than most of the volunteers, but he was stronger and more determined. He could march longer, shoot straighter, and fight harder than men 10 years younger. And he brought skills no other commando possessed. He could put an arrow into a target at 200 yards. He could play the bagpipes while marching into battle. He could handle a broadsword with the skill of a medieval knight. The other commandos didn't know what to make of him at first. Some thought he was showing off. Others thought he was genuinely insane. But as the training progressed, they began to understand his logic. Private Danny Morrison from Liverpool was the first to figure it out. He was 22 years old, former dock worker, built like a brick, fast with his hands, but slow to trust. He cornered McAllister after a live fire exercise in week 3. Lieutenant, can I ask you something? McAllister was cleaning his rifle. Why the bow? Really? Not the official answer. The real one. McAllister looked at him for a moment, then set down his rifle. You ever been in a street fight? Morrison, plenty, sir. Liverpool docks. Fight every week. Who wins, the biggest guy or the scariest guy? Morrison thought about it. Scariest. Exactly. Size doesn't matter if the other man thinks you're crazy enough to do anything. Fear wins before the first punch. Same principle in combat. A German sees me coming with a bow and bagpipes and a sword, his brain short circuits. He's trained to fight rifles. He's never seen this. Doesn't know how to respond. Freezes for 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, you and the rest of the squad kill him while he's staring at me. Morrison nodded slowly. So you're bait. No, I'm psychological warfare. There's a difference. What difference? Bait expects to die. I expect to win. Morrison grinned. You're a mad bastard, sir. Probably. But I'm alive. And so is everyone who follows me. That story spread through the commando training camp like wildfire. Within a week, every volunteer knew about the American with the medieval weapons. Within 2 weeks, they were asking him to teach them. McAllister ran night classes. Unofficial, not part of the standard curriculum. He taught archery to anyone who wanted to learn. Taught sword work. Taught taught bagpipes to the few who had the patience. But more than that, he taught them how to think, how to see combat as a psychological battle first and a physical battle second, how to use surprise and confusion as weapons more deadly than bullets, how to make the enemy think you were something they couldn't understand. And slowly the other commandos stopped thinking he was insane. They started thinking he was a genius. Tommy Reeves and Frank Donovan both volunteered for commando training. Both were accepted. Both ended up in McAllister's unit. Donovan had changed since Dunkirk. The old sergeant was quieter now, more focused. He had watched Billy Hayes die, and it had affected him in ways he didn't talk about. But McAllister saw it in his eyes. Donovan wasn't just fighting Germans anymore. He was fighting to make sure no one else died the way Billy had. Tommy Reeves had changed too. The scared kid from Detroit was gone. In his place was a young soldier who moved with confidence and spoke with authority. He had killed his first enemy at Dunkirk, had watched his friend die, had learned that fear was normal and survival was skill. He was still afraid sometimes, but now he knew what to do with that fear. The three of them became the core of McAllister's commando unit, the American lieutenant with his medieval weapons, the World War I sergeant who had seen it all twice, the factory worker from Detroit who learned fast and fought hard. They trained together for 6 months, and in December 1941, they received their first mission, Operation Archery, target the Norwegian island of Vågsøy. 150 German soldiers, 4 coastal artillery guns, multiple fortified positions. The commandos would land at dawn on December 27th, 300 men against a fortified garrison. Expected casualties 40%. McAllister read the briefing and smiled. Finally, a chance to prove his grandfather right. Weapons don't become obsolete, warriors do. And James McAllister had no intention of being obsolete. The briefing room at the commando base in Scotland was cold. December wind rattled the windows. 50 officers crowded around a table, covered in maps and reconnaissance photos. Lieutenant Colonel John Durnford Slater stood at the head of the table. British, career officer, veteran of the Great War, commander of No. 3 Commando. He had a reputation for aggressive tactics and zero tolerance for incompetence. He pointed at the map. Vågsøy Island, Norwegian coast, German garrison of approximately 150 men, 4 coastal artillery guns, here, and here. Those guns control the approaches to the harbor. They can sink our landing craft before we get within 500 yards of the beach. He looked around the room. Our job is to land on Moløy Island, small fortified position guarding the approach to Vågsøy. Neutralize the coastal guns. Time limit 10 minutes. If we don't silence those guns in 10 minutes, the follow-up waves will be slaughtered in the water. Someone asked about air support. Durnford Slater nodded. RAF will provide cover. Royal Navy will bombard German positions from offshore. But ultimately, this comes down to boots on the ground. We have to take those guns. Who leads the first wave? Durnford Slater looked directly at McAllister. Lieutenant McAllister, you'll take 105 commandos onto Moløy Island at 0845. Naval bombardment lifts at 0848. You have until 0858 to destroy the guns. 10 minutes, not 1 second more. McAllister nodded. Understood, sir. Durnford Slater studied him. I've read your Fafia, Lieutenant. Dunkirk. Archery champion. Unconventional methods. Some of my officers think you are insane. McAllister kept his face neutral. What do you think, sir? I think you're either the bravest man I've met or the craziest. Possibly both. Can you do this? Yes, sir. How McAllister glanced at the other officers in the room, then back at Durnford Slater. Sir, I'd like permission to bring my personal equipment. What equipment? A longbow, a Scottish claymore, and a set of bagpipes. The room went completely silent. One of the British captains laughed, then realized McAllister wasn't joking. The laugh died. Durnford Slater stared at him. You want to assault a fortified German position with medieval weapons? Among other things, yes, sir. Why? Because the Germans are expecting rifles and grenades. They're not expecting a man playing bagpipes and swinging a sword. The confusion will give my men a tactical advantage. Durnford Slater looked at his adjutant, then back at McAllister. Lieutenant, those weapons are not authorized under Army Regulations 670-1. I'm aware, sir. Carrying unauthorized weapons in a combat zone is a court-martial offense. I'm aware of that too, sir. Then why would you risk it? McAllister met his eyes. Because it works, sir. Because I've already used these weapons at Dunkirk, and they saved lives. And because I'd rather face a court-martial for winning than a funeral for losing. The room stayed silent. Durnford Slater looked at the map, then at McAllister, then at the map again. Finally, he spoke. I didn't hear any of that, Lieutenant. I don't know what weapons you're planning to bring. As far as I'm concerned, you are carrying standard-issue equipment. Is that clear, crystals clear, sir? Dismissed. McAllister walked out of the briefing room with Tommy Reeves and Frank Donovan right behind him. Donovan waited until they were outside. Then he grabbed McAllister's arm. Flint, did you just admit to regulation violations in front of 15 officers? Yes. And the colonel let you go anyway. Yes. Why? McAllister smiled. Because he's losing this war, and he's desperate. And desperate men are willing to try anything, even medieval weapons. Tommy Reeves shook his head. Sir, you're insane. Probably, but I'm alive. And after Volkswagen, the Germans are going to wish they'd never heard my name. They boarded the transport ships on Christmas Day, 1941. 105 commandos under McAllister's command. Young men, old men, factory workers and farmers and clerks, all volunteers, all willing to die if it meant striking back at the enemy. McAllister stood at the rail as the ship pulled away from Scotland. Tommy Reeves was beside him. The kid was nervous, kept checking his rifle, checking his ammunition, checking his gear. You ready, Tommy? Tommy didn't answer for a moment. Then I keep thinking about Billy, sir, about how fast it happened. 1 second he was fine, next second he was gone. McAllister nodded. I think about him too. You really think the bow will make a difference? I know it will, because the Germans won't be ready for it. And unready men make mistakes. And mistakes get them killed instead of us. Tommy looked at him. What if they shoot you first? What if you step off that boat and they just cut you down? Then you'll have to finish the song, Tommy. What song? Whichever one I'm playing when they shoot me. Despite everything, Tommy smiled. They sailed north through the Arctic darkness, past the coast of Scotland into the Norwegian Sea. The temperature dropped below freezing. Ice formed on the deck railings. The men huddled in their quarters, checking weapons, writing letters home, trying not to think about what was coming. McAllister spent the voyage studying maps with Donovan and the other section leaders, rehearsing signals, going over the plan again and again. Frank Donovan pulled him aside the night before the assault. Flint, if something happens to you tomorrow, if you go down, what do I tell your family? McAllister thought about that. Tell them I died doing what I believed in. Tell them I didn't waste my life following stupid regulations. Tell them I saved as many men as I could. Donovan nodded. Anything else? Yeah. Tell them I kept Billy's promise. Tell them I made sure no one else died for no reason. I'll tell them. They shook hands. At 0845 on December 27, 1941, the landing craft carrying James McAllister and 105 commandos approached Molloy Island through a curtain of smoke. Royal Air Force bombers had dropped smoke canisters along the shoreline to blind the German gunners. HMS Kenya was firing 6-inch shells at the shore battery. Explosions lit up the Norwegian coast like lightning. McAllister stood in the bow of the lead craft, fully exposed to enemy fire. The other commandos crouched behind the steel sides, but their commander remained standing. He had his bagpipes inflated and ready. The shore was 200 yards away, then 150, then 100. German machine guns opened fire. Bullets snapped through the air, punched holes in the steel sides of the landing craft, splashed in the water. McAllister didn't move. 75 yards, 50 yards, 25. The ramp dropped, and before any of his men could move, Lieutenant James McAllister stepped forward into the freezing surf and began playing the March of the Cameron Men. The sound of the bagpipes cut through the explosions and gunfire like a blade through cloth. It was the most Scottish sound in the world, and it was coming from a beach in Nazi-occupied Norway. The Germans in the shore battery heard it and could not believe what they were hearing. They had been trained to fight British soldiers with rifles and grenades. They had not been trained to fight a madman playing music while walking calmly toward their guns. McAllister finished the tune. 40 seconds. Every German on that beach stood frozen trying to process what they were seeing. Then he set down his bagpipes, pulled a grenade from his belt, and hurled it at the nearest bunker. The explosion snapped the Germans out of their trance. But by then, 105 commandos were already on the beach behind McAllister, firing their weapons charging up the slope. And the battle for Moley Island had begun. The assault on Moley Island took exactly 10 minutes. McAllister led his commandos through the German positions like a force of nature, sword in his right hand, revolver in his left, moving from bunker to bunker with Tommy Reeves and Frank Donovan covering his flanks. The Germans tried to respond, but they were disorganized, confused, still trying to understand what had just happened. One moment they had been in a fortified position with clear fields of fire. The next moment a madman was playing bagpipes on their beach, and now he was in their trenches with a medieval sword. Some surrendered immediately. Others tried to fight and died quickly. By 0858, all 4 coastal artillery guns were destroyed. The German commander and 15 of his men were prisoners. The rest were dead or running. Mission complete. 0 casualties. HMS Kenya signaled. Well done, Moley. Main assault proceeding. McAllister stood on the beach breathing hard, sword still in hand. Tommy Reeves appeared beside him. The kid's face was flushed with adrenaline. Sir, we just won because of bagpipes. McAllister smiled. And a sword. Don't forget the sword. Frank Donovan walked up. Blood on his uniform, but none of it his. He looked at McAllister for a long moment. I was wrong about you, Lieutenant. At Dunkirk. I thought you were crazy. Now I think you're a genius. Can I be both? Donovan laughed. Yeah, you probably are. The radio crackled. McAllister here. Lieutenant, this is Durnford Slater. We're meeting heavy resistance in South WWII. German reinforcements arrived overnight. Casualties mounting. Need your men. Now. McAllister looked at his commandos. Tired. Bloody. But still standing. On your feet. We're not done yet. They commandeered landing craft and crossed the narrow strait to South WWII. The sound of gunfire was constant now. Not the controlled burst of a planned assault. The chaotic rattle of a street fight. McAllister's craft hit the beach and he jumped out into chaos. German snipers were firing from windows and rooftops. Machine gun nests covered the main streets. British commandos were pinned down behind walls and inside buildings unable to advance. Bodies lay in the streets. The smell of cordite and blood hung in the air. Durnford Slater found McAllister within minutes. His face was grim. Germans had 200 men here, not 150, and they're veterans. Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers, best Germany has. We're taking heavy casualties. McAllister scanned the town. What do you need? Break the stalemate. Find a way through. I don't care how. McAllister turned to Donovan and Reeves. Frank, take 50 men flank left. Tommy, you're with Frank. If he goes down, you lead. Tommy's eyes went wide. Sir, I can't. Yes, you can. You've been ready since Dunkirk. You just didn't know it. Donovan clapped Tommy on the shoulder. Stay close to me, kid. You'll be fine. McAllister took the other 50 commandos and moved down a side street. German machine gun fire raked the walls above their heads. Brick dust rained down. Someone behind him grunted and fell. McAllister didn't look back. Couldn't. Forward was the only direction that mattered. They reached the fish oil factory at 0930. The building was massive, 3 stories, German soldiers fortified inside. This was the strategic target. The factory processed fish oil into glycerin. The Germans used it to make explosives. Destroying it would cripple their ammunition production in this sector. But 20 Germans were inside with excellent defensive positions. McAllister studied the building, then made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed in any other army. He walked to the front door, set down his rifle, picked up his bagpipes, and began playing Scotland the Brave. The Germans inside heard it. McAllister could hear them shouting, confused, arguing, one voice louder than the others. Abist, der Verrückte, the madman. He's here. Someone else. Impossible. That's propaganda. First voice, I'm telling you, it's him. The American with the sword. 10 Germans fled out the back exit, straight into Donovan's ambush. McAllister's team stormed the front entrance. The remaining Germans surrendered without firing a shot. They were young, supply troops, clerks and cooks pressed into combat duty. They had heard the stories about the American who fought with medieval weapons, thought they were exaggerations. Now they knew better. McAllister's men planted demolition charges on the glycerin tanks. 5-minute fuse, everyone out. McAllister did a head count. 49, 50, 51. Wait, he had taken 52 men into the factory. Where's Reeves? Donovan's face went pale. He was with my group. We got separated when... McAllister didn't wait to hear the rest. He ran back inside the factory. The building was full of smoke. Chemical fires burning where demolition charges had been placed. Visibility near zero. McAllister moved by instinct, calling Reeves's name. A weak voice from the back corner. Here. Sir, I'm here. McAllister found him pinned under a fallen beam. The kid's leg was trapped. He was trying to lift the beam, but couldn't get the leverage. Tommy saw McAllister and his face crumpled. Sir, go. I can't. Just go. McAllister grabbed the beam, lifted. His muscles screamed. The beam didn't budge. He thought about Billy Hayes, thought about the promise he made. No more men left behind. He lifted again, felt something tear in his shoulder. Didn't care. The beam moved 6 inches. It was enough. Tommy pulled his leg free. McAllister dropped the beam and grabbed the kid by his collar, dragged him toward the exit, seconds ticking down. The charges would blow in less than a minute. They made it out with 30 seconds to spare. McAllister threw Tommy forward and dove after him. The factory exploded behind them. The shock wave picked them both up and threw them 20 feet through the air. They landed hard. McAllister's ears were ringing, couldn't hear anything but a high-pitched whine. Tommy was beside him, lips moving. McAllister couldn't hear what he was saying. Then sound came back, muffled at first, then clearer. Tommy was crying. You came back. Sir, you came back for me. McAllister sat up slowly. His shoulder felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through it. What did I tell you at Dunkirk? Tommy, I don't leave my men behind. Donovan appeared. Help them both to their feet. You two scared 10 years off my life. Sorry about that, Frank. Don't apologize. Just don't do it again. The battle for South WWII lasted until mid-afternoon. The commandos systematically cleared the town building by building. They destroyed the fish oil factories with demolition charges. They captured German documents and code books. They took over 100 prisoners, but the victory came at a cost. 17 British commandos were killed in the fighting. 53 more were wounded. McAllister emerged from the battle without a scratch. His sword had blood on it. His bagpipes were undamaged. His bow had accounted for 3 German sentries who never knew what hit them. And his reputation was made. Word of the WWII raid spread through the British military like wildfire. The officer who played bagpipes into battle, the madman with the broadsword. Newspapers ran stories. Commanders requested him for their operations. The War Office stopped questioning his unusual equipment choices. The German High Command was furious. Adolf Hitler himself issued orders strengthening coastal defenses throughout Norway. 30,000 additional troops were diverted to garrison duty along the Norwegian coast. Troops that could have been fighting in Russia or North Africa. A single raid by 300 commandos had tied down an entire army. But McAllister wasn't thinking about strategic victories or reputation. He was thinking about the promise he still hadn't kept. That night after the commandos returned to Scotland, McAllister sat alone in his quarters and took out the photograph. 2 blonde girls in matching dresses. Billy Hayes' daughters, Annie and Rose. He had carried this photo for 7 months. Had promised Billy he would tell them something, but he still didn't know what. Tell them Daddy what? Tell them Daddy loved them. They already knew that. Tell them Daddy died a hero, empty words. Tell them Daddy's death changed everything. That McAllister had spent 7 months breaking regulations and risking court-martial because one good man died for no reason. He wrote a letter, tore it up, wrote another, tore that up too. Finally, on the 3rd attempt, he wrote something that felt true. Mrs. Hayes, Iowa, your husband Billy died at Dunkirk, saving my life. His last words were about your daughters. He wanted them to know something, but he died before he could finish. I've thought about those words every day for 7 months, and I think I finally understand what he was trying to say. Tell them Daddy did his duty. Tell them Daddy kept his promises. Tell them Daddy made a difference, because he did, Mrs. Hayes. Billy's sacrifice changed how we fight. I've taught 50 men to use unconventional weapons, to think creatively, to do whatever it takes to keep their brothers alive. 500 men came home from WWII because of the tactics Billy inspired. Your husband's death wasn't meaningless. It was the beginning of something important. I'm sorry I couldn't save him, but I'm saving everyone I can now. Respectfully, Captain James McAllister. He sealed the letter, addressed it, put it in his footlocker. He never mailed it, because 3 months later, he would be in Sicily, 6 months after that, Italy, and 9 months after that, Yugoslavia. And by then, he would have saved thousands of men using the tactics he learned from Billy Hayes' death. But he would also face his own death, multiple times, and one of those times he wouldn't escape. Sicily fell in August 1943. Italy followed in September. McAllister led his commandos through both campaigns. His reputation grew with each battle. The Germans called him Der Verrückte, the madman. They told stories that made him sound like a ghost, like something out of legend rather than a flesh and blood man. Some German units retreated rather than face him. Others fought harder, determined to kill the American who made them look like fools. The battle at Melina was where McAllister's legend reached its peak. September 14th, 1943. Night. Hills above the town of Melina in southern Italy. German observation posts directing artillery onto American positions. Had to be eliminated before dawn or 500 Americans would die in the morning assault. The problem, frontal assault, would be suicide. German machine guns covered every approach. McAllister's solution: infiltrate with one man. Capture, don't kill. Use psychological warfare instead of bullets. He chose Tommy Reeves as his partner. Donovan protested. Flint, this is insane. 2 men against 40. McAllister shook his head. 2 men can move silently. 40 men make noise. We don't need firepower, Frank. We need fear. Tommy checked his rifle, hands steady, not the scared kid from Dunkirk anymore. I'm ready, sir. They left at midnight. Moved through the darkness using terrain for cover. Avoided German patrols by crawling through drainage ditches and along stone walls. McAllister navigated by stars. Montana skills put to use in Italian mountains. At 0400, they reached the first German position. Mortar crew, 4 men smoking cigarettes. Relaxed, not expecting trouble. McAllister drew his claymore, approached silently, stepped into their firelight. The Germans turned, saw him. One dropped his cigarette. Mein Gott. Der Verrückte. McAllister spoke in perfect German. Weapons down, now. They surrendered immediately. Tommy emerged from the darkness, stared. Sir, they just gave up. McAllister used his revolver lanyard as rope, tied the first prisoner's hands. Reputation is a weapon too, Tommy. These men have heard stories. They'd rather surrender to the devil they know than fight him. They used the prisoners as guides, moved from position to position. Each time McAllister appeared with a sword, each time Germans surrendered rather than fight. By 0600, they had captured 42 German soldiers, an entire mortar platoon plus the observation team, marched them down the mountain as the sun rose. The wounded Germans were placed on carts and pushed by their fellow prisoners. McAllister walked at the front of the column, Tommy at the rear, 1 American with an empty rifle, 1 American with a medieval sword, 42 prisoners who couldn't believe what had just happened. They reached American lines at 0645. Donovan saw them coming. His mouth fell open. Holy, Flint, how many? 42. Lost count after 40. Tommy grinned. Sir, I should tell you, my rifle's been empty since prisoner number 3. Never reloaded. Didn't need to. McAllister laughed. That's the smartest thing you've ever done, Tommy. The story of the 42 prisoners spread through the Allied forces within 24 hours. It became legendary. Proof that psychological warfare could accomplish what firepower couldn't. Proof that one man with creativity and courage could change the course of a battle. McAllister received the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation praised his initiative, his leadership, and his courage. It didn't mention the sword. Some things were too unusual even for official records. By spring 1944, McAllister had been promoted to lieutenant colonel. He commanded the 2nd Ranger Battalion. His methods had been studied and copied by other units. The tactics he pioneered at WWII and Melina were now standard procedure for special operations forces. He had proven his grandfather right. Weapons don't become obsolete. Warriors do. But his war was about to take a dark turn. Yugoslavia, May 1944. The island of Brač, a raid that should have succeeded, but instead became a disaster. The plan called for American Rangers and British commandos to land at night and advance immediately to German positions in the hills. Speed was essential. Delay meant the Germans could reinforce and prepare, but the Yugoslav partisans who were supposed to support the attack hesitated. They saw the German fortifications and got scared, refused to advance until morning. McAllister was furious. Every hour we wait, they get stronger. We just lost surprise. The partisan commander shook his head. We attack at dawn. There was nothing McAllister could do. He couldn't force 1,500 partisans to fight, so he waited through the long night knowing that sunrise would bring hell. Dawn came. The partisans still refused to move. McAllister made a decision. 83 commandos, American and British, would attack alone. Donovan looked at the hills, at the German positions. Then at McAllister. We're going to die up there. Probably. But if we don't go, 500 men die tomorrow when German artillery destroys the main landing force. So we go. Tommy Reeves checked his rifle one last time. His hands weren't shaking. He had been through too much to be scared anymore. Let's do this. McAllister picked up his bagpipes. One more time, boys. One more time. The assault began at 0600. McAllister led from the front, bagpipes playing, sword raised, charging uphill toward German machine gun positions. The Germans were ready. They had spent the night preparing. Machine guns swept the slopes. Mortars exploded among the advancing commandos. Men fell. The attack stalled halfway up the hill. McAllister pushed forward anyway. Couldn't stop. Stopping meant dying. Forward was the only chance. Tommy Reeves was 10 yards behind him, firing his rifle, calling out targets to the other Rangers. Frank Donovan was 20 yards to the right, leading his own section. The old sergeant was everywhere, pulling wounded men to cover, directing fire, keeping the attack moving. Then the German mortar team spotted McAllister's position, saw the group of commandos clustered around their commander. Perfect target. They fired a full salvo, 6 mortar rounds, all landing within a 10-meter circle. The world exploded. McAllister was standing slightly apart from his men, playing his bagpipes to keep morale up. The explosions hit behind him. The shockwave knocked him down but didn't kill him. Everyone else in his command group died instantly, or almost everyone. Tommy Reeves took shrapnel to his head. Severe concussion, skull fracture, bleeding from his ears, unconscious but alive. Frank Donovan was blown into a ravine, disappeared in the smoke and dust. No one saw where he landed. McAllister pulled himself to his feet, ears ringing, vision blurred, blood running down his face from a dozen small cuts. He looked around, bodies everywhere. His men, good men, dead or dying. Tommy unconscious, Frank missing. The attack collapsing, German soldiers advancing, 20 of them. Rifles raised, McAllister had no ammunition left, no grenades, no backup, no hope. He sat down on a rock, picked up his bagpipes, somehow still intact, and began playing Will Ye No Come Back Again, a Scottish lament, a song of farewell, a final act of defiance. The Germans approached cautiously. They had fought commandos before war, but they had never seen anything like this. A British officer playing music while surrounded by the bodies of his men, playing calmly, as if death was just another appointment to keep. They didn't shoot immediately, too confused, too curious, too respectful perhaps of a man who faced death with such composure. A German officer shouted, "Throw grenade," but no shoot. The grenade landed at McAllister's feet. He kept playing. The explosion knocked him unconscious. When he woke, he was a prisoner. The German Hauptmann stood over him. "You are der Verrückte, the madman. You are famous Herr Oberstleutnant." McAllister tried to sit up. His head felt like someone had driven an axe through it. "Where are my men?" The young one lives, badly wounded but alive. We have given him medical treatment. He will survive as prisoner. And the sergeant, the older man. The Hauptmann shook his head. "We found no body. The ravine is deep, many meters. Either he fell and died or he survived and escaped." We do not know. McAllister closed his eyes. Frank, Tommy, all of them. Dead or captured because I led them into a trap. The Hauptmann's voice was surprisingly gentle. You fought well, Herr Oberstleutnant. With courage, we respect that. You will be treated fairly. McAllister opened his eyes, looked at the German officer. Why didn't you shoot me when I was playing the bagpipes? The Hauptmann was quiet for a moment. Then, because you were already dead, we thought. A man does not play music when surrounded unless he has accepted death. To shoot such a man felt wrong, like shooting a priest at prayer. McAllister almost laughed. That's the most German thing I've ever heard. Perhaps. The Hauptmann gestured to two soldiers. Take him to the truck. He goes to Berlin for interrogation. Berlin, interrogation. And after that, probably a concentration camp. McAllister had spent 3 years fighting to keep men alive, had broken regulations and risked court-martial, and used medieval weapons because he refused to let good soldiers die for stupid reasons. And now he was going to die himself, in a German prison camp, far from Montana, far from the mountains where his grandfather taught him that weapons don't become obsolete. The irony was almost funny. Almost. The Germans flew McAllister to Berlin under heavy guard. They were convinced that anyone named McAllister must be related to Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister. Thought they had captured a valuable prisoner, someone who knew strategic secrets. The Gestapo interrogators were disappointed. McAllister had no connection to Winston Churchill, no knowledge of invasion plans or strategic decisions. He was a field officer who fought with a bow and sword because he thought it worked better than conventional weapons. After 3 days of questioning, the Gestapo gave up, sent him to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, Sonderlager A, special compound for prominent prisoners. McAllister arrived in June 1944. The camp held politicians, resistance fighters, and other enemies of the Nazi state. Most prisoners expected to be executed eventually. They were just waiting to find out when. McAllister had no intention of waiting. He met squadron leader Bertram James on his second day. British RAF officer, had participated in the Great Escape from Stalag Luft 3. 50 of his comrades had been executed by the Gestapo. James survived only because he was recaptured quickly. They were sitting in the prisoner exercise yard when James approached. You're the American with the sword. McAllister looked up. That's me. You're the one who dug a 100-meter tunnel under Stalag Luft 3. James sat down. Guilty. Want to dig another one? McAllister smiled. Yes, I do. They began planning immediately. Recruited 3 other prisoners. Started digging in July. Used spoons and scraps of metal. Worked at night. Hid the excavated dirt under compost piles in the garden. The tunnel was 110 meters long, passed under the fence, and emerged in woods beyond the camp perimeter. It took 4 months to dig. McAllister was the strongest digger. His Montana wilderness experience helped. He knew how to shore up unstable earth, how to navigate underground using dead reckoning, how to work in cramped, dark spaces without panicking. He told stories while they dug. About Volkswagen, about the 42 prisoners, about Billy Hayes and the promise he still hadn't kept. James listened, then said, You know the odds of us surviving this war are almost zero. I know. So why keep fighting? Why not just accept it? McAllister stopped digging, looked at James in the darkness. Because accepting death means they won, and I refuse to let them win. On September 23, 1944, 5 men crawled through the tunnel to freedom. McAllister and James paired up, planned to walk 200 kilometers north to the Baltic coast, steal a boat to Sweden. Simple plan, probably impossible. They almost made it. For 2 weeks, they moved through Germany on foot, traveled at night, hid during the day, stole vegetables from fields, drank from streams, avoided roads and towns, and anywhere Germans might look twice at 2 ragged men. They made it 150 kilometers, 50 kilometers from the coast. Then a German patrol spotted them near Rostock. Papiere, papers. They had no papers. The Germans arrested them, identified them as escaped prisoners from Sachsenhausen, transferred them to Austria, deep in the Alps, far from any Allied lines. McAllister spent the winter of 44 to 45 watching Germany collapse. Allied bombers overhead every day. news filtering in about Soviet advances and American victories. The war was ending. Everyone knew it. But for prisoners in an Austrian mountain camp, liberation seemed impossibly distant. In late April 45, the SS tried to move the prisoners deeper into Germany, planned to use them as hostages. But a Wehrmacht officer named Wichard von Alvensleben intervened, protected the prisoners from the SS. After a tense standoff, the SS withdrew. The prisoners were abandoned in a small Italian village called Niederdorf, free but stranded behind enemy lines. Most prisoners waited for Allied forces to arrive. James McAllister did not wait. He had been a prisoner for a year, had escaped once, been recaptured, survived a concentration camp, watched Germany crumble. He was not going to sit in a village while there was still a war to fight. On April 30th, 1945, Lieutenant Colonel James McAllister began walking south toward Allied lines, 150 kilometers, through the Italian Alps, on a badly sprained ankle. With no food, no weapons, no identification, he walked anyway. Montana wilderness skills saved his life. He navigated by stars, found water in mountain streams, avoided German stragglers and Italian partisans who might have shot first and asked questions later. For 8 days he walked, alone, in pain, starving, but moving forward because forward was the only direction that mattered. On May 8, 1945, he reached the city of Verona, encountered an American armored reconnaissance unit from the 3rd Infantry Division. A sergeant stared at him. "Who the hell are you?" McAllister's voice was hoarse. "Lieutenant Colonel James McAllister, 2nd Ranger Battalion, serial number 043279. You got ID. Germans took it when they captured me." The sergeant looked skeptical. "Where were you captured?" "Yugoslavia. May last year. Brach Island. And you've been a prisoner since then." "Sachsenhausen. Then Austria. Escaped April 30th. Walked here." The sergeant whistled. "You walked 150 clicks through enemy territory, more or less, with no gear, no weapon, no food." McAllister met his eyes. "I've walked farther for worse reasons, Sergeant." The sergeant laughed. "All right, Colonel. Let's get you verified and cleaned up. War's over anyway. Germany surrendered 3 hours ago." McAllister stared at him. "It's over, yes, sir. VE Day, victory in Europe. You made it." McAllister sat down on the curb, suddenly exhausted. He had spent 5 years fighting, had led men through France and Norway and Sicily and Italy and Yugoslavia, had broken regulations and risked court-martial and used medieval weapons because he believed in keeping his soldiers alive. And now it was over. The war was won, but the cost had been terrible. Billy Hayes, dead at Dunkirk, never saw his daughters again. 17 commandos, dead at Vogsoy, dozens more, dead in Sicily, Italy, Yugoslavia. Tommy Reeves, alive but captured, spent a year as a POW, severe head injuries, would never be the same. Frank Donovan, missing in action, presumed dead, blown into a ravine at Brach, no body recovered. Dead or broken, because of decisions McAllister made, because he led them into battles they couldn't win. The weight of it crushed him. He sat on that curb in Verona and wept. McAllister returned to England in mid-May. The army debriefed him, verified his identity, confirmed his story, gave him medical treatment for malnutrition and various injuries. They asked him what he wanted to do next. He said, "I want to finish the war." "Sir, the war in Europe is over." "Not the whole war. Japan is still fighting." "You want to transfer to the Pacific?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I'm not done yet." The army approved his request, sent him home to the United States to await orders. He was in Montana when the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when Japan surrendered, when the Second World War finally ended for real. McAllister's reaction was bitter disappointment. He had spent months preparing to fight the Japanese, had planned to lead Rangers onto Japanese beaches with his sword and bagpipes just as he had done in Norway and Sicily. Now there would be no invasion, no final battle, no chance to prove one more time that old weapons and new thinking could change the course of history. The war was over, and James McAllister didn't know what to do with himself. He spent the next 3 years in administrative duties. Burma, Palestine, places where the army needed experienced officers but didn't need warriors. In 1948, he was in Jerusalem when the Hadassah hospital convoy was ambushed. 77 Jews killed, 700 medical staff trapped on Mount Scopus, surrounded by hostile forces. McAllister organized the evacuation, negotiated with British authorities, Jewish leaders, and Arab commanders, personally oversaw the operation, got all 700 people out safely without firing a shot. When reporters asked how he did it, he gave a simple answer. People are less likely to shoot at someone who's smiling at them. I smiled a lot. It was psychological warfare again. Different context, same principle. Make people see something unexpected. Use their confusion to your advantage. The tactics Billy Hayes inspired still worked, even in peacetime. McAllister retired from the Army in 1959. Lieutenant Colonel, 33 years of service, multiple decorations from multiple nations, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart twice, British Distinguished Service Order. He returned to Montana, bought a small ranch near Flathead Valley, the same mountains where his grandfather taught him to shoot a bow and navigate by stars and believe that weapons don't become obsolete. He lived quietly, practiced archery daily, played bagpipes at veteran ceremonies. Rarely spoke about the war unless someone asked directly. In 1955, he became the first American to surf a river boar wave. Newspapers called him the Mad Colonel again. He grinned and said he was just staying consistent. The years passed, the world changed, the Korean War, the Cold War, new conflicts, new weapons, guided missiles, jet aircraft, nuclear bombs. The kind of war McAllister had fought seemed like ancient history, but the lessons he taught endured. Special operations forces around the world studied his tactics, unconventional warfare, psychological operations, using surprise and creativity to accomplish what firepower alone could not. James McAllister's legacy lived on in every soldier who learned to think differently, to fight smarter rather than harder, to use fear and confusion as weapons just as deadly as bullets. And then in summer 1985, 3 people knocked on his door. McAllister was 78 years old, living alone on his Montana ranch, still shooting his bow every morning, still playing his bagpipes every evening. He opened the door and found 3 strangers on his porch, a woman in her 60s, a man in his early 60s, a younger woman in her mid-30s. The older woman spoke first. "Colonel McAllister, my name is Sarah Hayes. Billy Hayes was my brother." McAllister felt the world tilt. "Billy," the man stepped forward. "Tommy Reeves, sir, you carried me out of a burning factory in Norway, saved my life at Bratch." McAllister stared. "Tommy, you're alive." "I thought," the young woman interrupted. Her voice was soft. "My name is Claire Donovan. My father was Frank Donovan, Master Sergeant. He served under you in World War II. McAllister's chest tightened. "Frank. Frank had a daughter," Claire smiled. "Born in 1950. He never met me. Died in 79. Heart attack. But my mother told me everything about you." McAllister shook his head slowly. "I don't understand. Frank was killed at Bratch, missing in action, presumed dead." Tommy Reeves spoke up. "No, sir. He survived. Blown into the ravine, knocked unconscious. Germans thought he was dead. Woke up 6 hours later with broken ribs and a concussion. Hid for 2 days. Then got captured by a different German unit that didn't know about the Bratch raid. Spent the rest of the war as a PO, but liberated in May 45. Came home, married, had Claire. Worked as an iron worker in Boston until he retired." McAllister felt tears on his face. He lived. Frank lived. "All these years, I thought." Claire Donovan's eyes were wet. "He talked about you constantly, Colonel. Said you were the bravest man he ever met. Taught him that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being terrified and doing the job anyway. He tried to find you after the war. Army said you were in Burma, then Palestine, then retired. He never found you." McAllister looked at the 3 of them. At Sarah Hayes, who had lost her brother. At Tommy Reeves, who had serviced and learned to walk again. At Claire Donovan, who had grown up hearing stories about a father who fought with a madman. They told him stories. Sarah talked about Billy's last letter, how he wrote that he trusted McAllister with his life. Tommy told him about recovering from his head injury, about learning to walk again, about working in the Detroit factories until he retired, about the nightmares that never quite went away but got easier over time. Claire spoke for her father, about how Frank never stopped talking about the war, about the officer who played bagpipes and fought with a sword, about the man who refused to leave anyone behind, about the legend who turned out to be human after all. McAllister listened to all of it, and when they finished, he took out the photograph. Billy's photograph, two blonde girls in matching dresses, the photo he had carried for 41 years. He handed it to Sarah Hayes. "This is yours now. I've kept it safe, but it belongs with Billy's family." Sarah looked at the photo, then at McAllister. "Annie and Rose are 49 and 48 now, Colonel. Both married, both have children, all of them alive because you kept their father's promise." "What promise?" Sarah smiled through tears. "Tell them Daddy did his duty. Tell them Daddy mattered." That's what he was trying to say. "And you spent 40 years making sure it was true." McAllister broke down then. 40 years of grief and guilt and loss pouring out. These three people hugged him and letting him cry and told him that he had done enough, that Billy and Frank and Tommy and all the others would forgive him for the ones he couldn't save, that he had kept his promise after all. James McAllister died on March 8, 1996, age 89, peacefully, in his sleep, in the Montana mountains where his grandfather taught him that weapons don't become obsolete. His funeral was small, family only. He was buried next to Angus McAllister in Flathead Valley. Tommy Reeves came, 83 years old, in a wheelchair. He told everyone that McAllister saved his life 3 times, at Dunkirk, in Norway, at Brach. Claire Donovan came, spoke about the father she never met and the man who made sure her father's sacrifice mattered. Sarah Hayes came, brought the photograph of Billy's daughters, now great-grandmothers themselves, all alive, all free, all living in the world that men like Billy and Frank and McAllister had died to protect. The gravestone was simple. James Flint McAllister, 1907 to 1996, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army, the last bowman. His weapons were donated to museums. The longbow went to the Smithsonian, the claymore to the National World War II Museum. The bagpipes stayed with his family, all still functional, all still deadly in the right hands, because weapons don't become obsolete. Warriors do, and James McAllister refused to be obsolete until the day he died. His legacy lived on, in special operations forces that studied his tactics, in soldiers who learned to think creatively, in every man and woman who learned that courage and innovation could change the course of battle. One longbow kill, the last one in modern warfare, proved that old weapons still worked if you knew how to use them. 42 prisoners captured with a sword, proved that psychological warfare could accomplish what firepower could not. 3,000 lives saved through unconventional tactics, proved that one man with determination could change a war. And 41 years carrying a promise, proved that the men who died were never forgotten. In the end, that was James McAllister's greatest weapon. Not the bow, not the sword, not the bagpipes. Memory, the refusal to forget the men who fell, the determination to make their deaths matter. The promise kept across 4 decades that Billy Hayes and Frank Donovan and all the others would be remembered, that their sacrifice changed how wars were fought, that they mattered. And on a cold Montana morning in March 1996, when James McAllister took his last breath and closed his eyes for the final time, he kept that promise one last time. Tell them he had said to Billy Hayes 41 years earlier. Tell them what? Tell them their fathers were heroes. Tell them their fathers changed the world. Tell them their fathers will never be forgotten. He told them. And now the story is told again, so that we remember, so that they are never forgotten, so that the last bowman and the men who followed him into hell live on in memory forever.